Welcome to the Living in the Future podcast, where we bring to light specialized topics from life in the modern age. I'm talking to Gregory Casamento, GNUStep lead developer. GNUStep is a development framework that closely follows the one used on Mac OS. It allows people to take the code of programs written for Mac OS and use them on other systems like Windows or Linux with almost no development work. It also allows people to write programs using an environment similar to the one on Mac OS. Hi, Greg. To start, at least at the beginning, let's talk about when Steve Jobs left Apple in the 80s.
Okay. Hey, how's it going? Basically, Steve Jobs he was let go from Apple because of a disagreement between him and the CEO that he hired. But everybody knows that. But once he left, he created a new company called Next, and Next was based on other ideas that he had gotten from Xerox PARC. In fact, I remember reading an article that quoted him saying that when he went to Xerox and created the Mac, based on what he saw, he said he only saw the surface, the very top of everything, and then what he did when he went to Next was he realized that everything that he missed was based on small talk. And so Next was an attempt to capture that environment in a friendlier sort of setting, like, under Unix, so that people could use small talk like constructs in Objective-C to build applications. But NextStep was basically just, when it first started out, it was basically just, there was no foundation layer. Because right now, Cocoa consists of the foundation layer, the app kit, and the core data layer.
And Cocoa is the current Mac OS development environment.
Yes, that's correct. And what happened was that they were using this like C strings and stuff like that in NextStep as sort of the foundation layer. But and then an app kit layer as well as an interface builder and stuff like that, and project builder. But that framework, when they realized that the C part of things wasn't necessarily portable everywhere, they moved to creating something called, a framework called Foundation, and then they revamped AppKit, and they added the now recognizable NS prefix, which some people say stands for Next Step, but other people think it stands for Next Son, and I think the second one is actually correct.
That's a little further down the road. When they first start doing the development, they were going to do hardware and software. Right. Operating systems at that time weren't that solid. And so this was seen as an innovation. And then they fail at hardware, so then they start doing software. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, because they had created the Cube, and the Cube was, of course, an elegant machine. And then they created the pizza box, the Next Station. And both machines are beautifully designed and wonderful machines. I actually had a couple of them. I think I have one or two of the slabs in storage. And they're beautiful machines. It's just that they were really, really expensive. So Next moved away from doing hardware and just started doing purely software. And they had moved to the Intel architecture, which is, and during that transition, they were supporting not only the old black hardware, but the new Intel hardware, which was basically pretty much any PC that you could put together that fit their specs. But it's actually interesting because that's where what we called back then fat binaries came from. It goes by another name today. It's called universal binaries. So when they switched from PowerPC back to Intel in, I think, 2000 and something, I can't remember, there was really no work to it. It was just using the Mach-O, tagged sections, which basically said this binary in this Mach-O file is for this architecture. So that's I mean, and sort of if you follow, the development of OpenStep, it eventually, once Apple bought Next and Next sort of took over from the inside, Steve Jobs became the CEO, and Avi Tevinian became the developer for operating systems, and various other key people at Next took key positions at Apple. It was sort of a reverse takeover. What was OpenStep, 4.2 whatever, became Cocoa when they released what was called Rhapsody, and Rhapsody was basically OpenStep with a Mac look on top, and things sort of went from there to their first release for PowerPC, which was Mac OS 10.0. And the GNUStep community, we really just, if you don't mind me going into that at this point.
Sure.
GNUStep started as an idea by a man named Paul Kuntz at Slack. And what he did was he had written a NextStep application called HippoDraw, which is basically just a simple drawing application. He created a library called libObjective-C-X, which contained just what he needed to build his application on Solaris, I believe. And he submitted that to the FSF, and I'm not sure if he was allowed to assign the copyright to the FSF, but still, it was the beginning of an idea. And what happened is that a couple of guys, one his name's Andrew McCallum and Scott Chrisley, started to write GNUStep and started to come up with the foundation layer.
Now, is this after the publication of the specification, or?
Yeah.
So what happens, from my understanding, is that when they fail at doing their own operating system, they just sell the development tools, which people seem to like and feel advances stuff. And when they do that, they publish the specification of them.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for bringing me down that avenue. What had happened is that there were basically, there was of course a reference implementation, which was OpenStep 4.2 for Mach, which you could buy and get on your Intel machine. As long as you had compatible hardware, like you had to have certain video cards and certain sound cards to make it work. Of course, there was also another, some what they called white hardware, which was Canon's Object Station, which a lot of people have forgotten about. And the Object Station was sort of supposed to be the premium white hardware solution for NextStep and OpenStep. So you had that, but you also had OpenStep for Windows, or OpenStep for, what was it called? OpenStep Enterprise for Windows. And basically that was just the frameworks in the development environment ported to Windows. And it's funny, you can grab it on the internet now today and it still works. You grab it, you install it, and of course, knowing Microsoft, they keep everything compatible. So, all the way back when, and you can still run OpenStep Enterprise applications just fine on your Windows box. And you can build them too. So, and you can install the environment. So it's actually pretty cool. but they also released something called OpenStep for Solaris 1.1. And OpenStep for Solaris was actually, if you look at it, it looks very much like GNUStep used to many years ago, because they're using X. They wrote a version. They wrote a display PostScript layer above X, and then they wrote the rest of the OpenStep spec over top of that. And funny little side story is that a lot of the people who worked on OpenStep at Next transitioned over to work on Java at Sun, because I believe when Sun did its OpenStep implementation, it gave them a lot of ideas that inspired parts of Java. Of course, a lot of people will very likely, vehemently argue or deny with that point. But it's a matter of course it's a matter of fact that there was an OpenStep copyright notice in the 1.0 version of Java.
I've heard that. I heard that as well when it was happening, that Java in some way was delivering on what NextStep was trying to do with the cross-platform development tools.
Right.
But when the spec gets published, that allows anybody to re-implement it.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and the policy at Next, as I remember it, because I was that if you could pass their test suite, then you would be officially labeled a version of OpenStep or an implementation of OpenStep. You didn't have to pay any. I don't believe that you had to pay any licensing fees for it. But of course, the GNUStep project, once that spec was published, we moved away from doing anything with NextStep, because obviously at that point NextStep is a dead end. Right. And so we followed the OpenStep spec, but we also added anything that Mac OS X or OpenStep itself, because the spec actually didn't have all of the classes that were in OpenStep 4.2. There were other classes in OpenStep 4.2 that were not specified in the 1994 publication of the OpenStep specification. So what we did was we implemented, most of the spec. Some classes, like NS Data Link and stuff like that, didn't really make a lot of sense on other platforms. So, we have stubs in there for that, for classes that, have no functionality outside of Apple or outside of Next at the time. But from there, we followed Cocoa, which is, of course, what OpenStep became, up until today. Right now, one of the things that I'm working on personally is trying to get us to 10.15, which is Catalina compatibility. And if you follow on with the diffs between 10.15 and 11 and then 12, there's not really that many. There's only some formatter changes, some behavioral changes with NS buttons and so on. But GNUStep has been trying very hard over the last 10 years to get compatible with modern versions of Cocoa, and enhancing the development tools. We have support now for zip files. When you create an application that uses zip files as to do your interface, it can read those zip files directly. It can also read storyboard files. I played a huge part in implementing the support for these things over the last several years. I became I wasn't always the maintainer I joined the project in, I think, I've known about the project since 1999, and I followed it until 2003 when I initially became an official member. And at that point, I think my first class was something like NS Screen or something like that, which basically figured out dimensions and color depths and stuff like that for displays you have attached to your computer. But I moved on from that to writing a number of different classes, as well as taking over the stalled, development of the interface builder equivalent, which was known as GORM. And with GORM, I had to enhance NS table view, write NS outline view, write a bunch of other classes like the class that NS toolbar, and various other things, so that I could even write GORM. So I had to basically bootstrap GORM from the bottom up. I had to write all of the GUI classes that supported it. I had to write GORM itself. And the cool thing is that I used GORM to write GORM. I would create GORM files to create inspectors for classes that I was writing or stuff like that in GUI. And it took me a number of years to work out. Not a number of years, but a number of years to finish GORM, for one thing. But it took me months to figure out certain things like custom class support, because there are sort of three modes of custom class support in Interface Builder. One of them is where you use basically a proxy class, where it's a completely unknown new class that isn't based on anything, where you can say it's similar like in Xcode, where you would drag in an NS object, an NS object from the library, and then you would basically say, okay, well, this object here is some other class that I've defined. Or the other mode is that you take an existing class, like say NS OpenGL view or NS outline view or NS view, something like that, and you basically create a subclass of that. That actually, there's only two modes. Sorry, you create a subclass of that then acts when the GORM file or the nib file or whatever is loaded into a live application, it then assumes that class is, it then instantiates itself as the subclass rather than the parent class. You know what I'm saying? So you're editing it in GORM as an NS view, but you might be editing it you might be using it in your application as my view or some other type of view or something like that. So I mean, it took me a while to figure that out, and it sounds simple, but it's not, because you have to switch modes when you load it into the editor. You know what I'm saying? You have to treat it differently when it loads into the editor, and you also have like editor classes that wrap around the existing classes inside of the model file, GORM, nib, whatever that you're using. I mean, at this point, GORM not GORM, GUI, the AppKit equivalent in GNUStep, can handle, I think it can handle GORM files, nib files, the XML-based ones, not the old Next ones, zib files, and we used to have something called Gmodel files, which were similar to the XML nibs, but they were usingplists. And honestly, historically, thinking back now, we should probably have stuck with that, because they were almost exactly like the XML nibs that were used a few years back by macOS.
So I mean, in some ways, you're saying that the frameworks that you've created that have tracked macOS are in some ways more adaptable than the ones delivered by Apple.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we actually have we don't have all of the classes that Apple has yet. Where I mean, if you look in the repository, there's a file called missing um, in libsGUI. Where I mean, GNUStep is hosted on GitHub, so you should be able to find it on GitHub. And under libsGUI and libsbase, there's a file called missing, and what that file specifies is everything that's not there. And right now, we're only missing about, I think, 20 some odd classes, and some of those classes are really insignificant. They're like drag and drop this, or they basically have to do it. Some of them have to do with drag and drop. The one I'm working on right now is NS Collection View, because between 10.5 when it was introduced and 10.11, it was drastically changed. So there are some places that GNUStep has more capability than macOS Cocoa, and there are some places where we are lacking some functionality. But I personally and others are working very hard to close that gap, so that it becomes a no-brainer for most macOS applications or Cocoa-based applications to be ported over to any one of Linux, Windows, FreeBSD, or any of the other BSDs.
Do you feel that Apple, as the iPhone has grown, has taken a focus off Mac OS X?
Yes, I do. Because you see a ton of new development in, the iOS side of things. You see a lot of new UI kit classes. You see a lot of new functionality that comes to iOS rather than coming to the Cocoa frameworks. I'm not sure whether or not that's because Apple is favoring those frameworks, or if the Cocoa framework is viewed as more mature, because of course it is, almost 35 years old now. So yeah, I mean, I have made that observation in the past. Yes, absolutely.
And so if somebody has these applications that they've written for Next, or more prominently for Mac OS, with all the work you've done, and they want to keep using them on an updated system, you're providing a way for them to keep distributing them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, there is one application or one company, a few companies that have done this in the past. I can talk about them publicly. So one of them is Eggplant, which is now owned by Keysight. Keysight is a large electronics producer, and they're also a large testing equipment and software company. And what they have done is they have their application called Eggplant Functional, and all of their other Eggplant offerings, like what they do is they test applications graphically. And what I had them do several years ago, I proposed to them that, I mean, they actually came to me and said that they needed a way to move off of Cocoa. They wanted to expand their market to Windows, and I helped them do that. Back then, we didn't have a very good way of translating Xcode build file or Xcode project files. I had written a quick and dirty utility called PBX build, but now what I've done is I've created a library that is called libxcode, and what it does is it reads the Xcode project file directly, gathers all the data about the build phases and copy phases and various script phases that you might have in your project. And literally all you need to do is go into your project. I mean, after you've built and installed libxcode, and of course its front end is called build tool. I didn't want to name it Xcode build, because then that would imply that it has all the same options and stuff like that, and it doesn't at the present time. But all you need to do is go into your project and type build tool, and it will read and interpret and build the application from the Xcode project file on another platform. Currently, it doesn't work on Windows because there's kind of the system command and the various other system calls that try to execute things on the command line. It tries to execute it under a DOS shell, which doesn't work because the installation of GNUStep on Windows depends on MSys2. But yeah, I mean, so GNUStep basically offers a way where you can take your OpenStep application or your macOS application with an Xcode project file and directly port it over to any platform that supports GNUStep or that GNUStep can build on with a minimal amount of changes. I mean, and that's the aim. Oddly, I mean, just one observation. Oddly, I have been contracted by a number of different companies in order to do ports, but I would say that any qualified Mac OS X developer, any person who knows Cocoa very well, could do it. They don't have to have any special knowledge about GNUStep or anything like that. I think some of these companies bring me on because I'm the lead, but it's very simple. It's just GNUStep, and one thing I have to also mention is one thing that GNUStep is infamous for is looking just like NextStep. Well, I mean, the thing about that is that when we first did GNUStep, we didn't have any other model to follow, so we just followed what we knew. And then when they changed over to using Aqua and stuff like that, obviously that was something that we wanted to also offer. So we created various themes, and we removed the drawing code from a lot of the different buttons and stuff like that, things that have sort of things that can be drawn in other ways or should be drawn in other ways on other platforms. And we created a theming framework, which basically, if you don't have any theme loaded, you're using the default theme. But if you do load a theme, which you can do dynamically, then it will replace all of those drawing functions with the ones from the theme. Okay, and what that means is that you can basically theme GNUStep to look like pretty much anything that you want. I mean, we have a Windows theme that delegates the button drawing and stuff like that to the WinUX theme.dll, which is the theming framework that Windows uses. Okay, so whenever if you're using a GNUStep application on Windows, it will use it will draw the buttons and other things in the theme that you currently have loaded on Windows. And if you change that theme on Windows, it will change to that too. And people have commented that it looks so pixel perfect. Well, that's because we're using a thin layer on Windows to basically go, okay, well, here's our theme, and then go delegate this to the theme drawing framework that exists on Windows. I did the same thing for GNOME, well, GTK, a while back. So not the modern version, but there's also themes that come very close to looking like Mac OS. The Aqua, sort of like the Aqua look, and various other themes that exist on Mac OS X. Sorry. So basically, yeah, I mean, GNUStep is not locked into looking like NextStep, and a lot of people have that misconception. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I've done it myself. I've installed the Aqua theme and seen the difference, and it does look like an Aqua application. I have to say that, I mean, that actually brings another point, which is that you could port your Mac OS application to something looking like a native Windows application using the framework as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive. What are you guys working on currently?
Mainly getting up to speed with 10.15. Getting up to, because we want to be able to, when someone asks what version of Mac OS 10 does GNUStep support, up until now it's been very difficult to say, oh, it supports 10 point whatever, but we want to be able to say that it supports, hey, we support 10.15. That's it. If you have an application that uses anything up to 10.15, we got you. I mean, that's the kind of, that's what we're pushing for right now. Also, perfecting, the build tool and the libs Xcode stuff that I told you about. I mean, those are my two current goals at this point. And the rest of, everybody else is working on better support for, we do have complete support for zip files, so that's not a problem. Fixing bugs, making sure everything is, very stable. One of the big holes in GNUStep right now, just full disclosure, is printing. Because, as I said before, we wrote sort of we didn't really write a DPS layer, but we wrote something close. And basically it contains all of the calls, all of the PostScript calls that you would normally make in an application in order to, or on either GNUStep, OpenStep, or early days OS 10, because in the early days there was a layer on top of Quartz for a while that would let you use the old DPS calls. I'm not sure if anybody else is aware of that, but we have a DPS layer, and so though it's not all DPS, all of DPS as it would have existed on OpenStep or Mac, it's enough at this point to do pretty good rendering. Perfect rendering on the screen, but it's quite different when you're rendering to a page. And one of the issues that we're having is that not always, but sometimes when you print something out from a GNUStep application, sometimes it doesn't handle images correctly. So that's one thing we're working on. That's one big thing that we're trying to fix, is printing doesn't work perfectly. And there's really no other really big holes in GNUStep at this point. The only thing that I've been trying to sort of decode is Apple has moved to using, instead of using like zip files or nib files and stuff like that in their compiled applications, because what used to happen is that they're now using something called the nib archive, which is completely foreign to me. I've never heard of it before. And that's something that's new in I think 10 new in version 12. And in some ways, maybe I'm being a little bit paranoid. In some ways, I think they are doing that because because they don't want anybody to be able to read those files. They don't want people to be able to just go in and decode, nib files or zip files or something like that.
So the nib files are what contain the user interface descriptions, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And it seems to be a trend with them that they seem to be moving to more and more proprietary solutions from what started off as an open specification.
Right.
With the success of the iPhone specifically.
Right. And I will tell you, I'm speaking only for myself. I can't speak for others in the group.
Sure.
I love my Mac, okay?
Right.
And I love my iPhone. But the one thing that I hate about Apple is what you just mentioned.
Right.
And one of the whole reasons why initially in 1997 and in 2003, one of the reasons why I got so passionately involved with this project was because I was afraid that Apple was going to kill it. Because Apple used to have a tendency to buy things and then kill them, and then just either ruin them or destroy them. And I was supremely convinced that Apple was just going to buy Next just to get Steve Jobs back. And that was, so I had fallen in love with NextStep and OpenStep when I was in college, because I went to the University of Maryland, and Next I think they had donated like 500 machines, I think a few cubes, and a ton of slabs and stuff like that to the University of Maryland at College Park. So I got a lot of exposure to that operating system when I was there, and I found it to be, very, very beautiful, and I didn't want it to die. So that's why I took, such a deep interest in this project, was because of that. And so basically, yeah, I mean, it is, they have moved, and to be honest with you, what it feels like with respect to what they're doing now, where they're moving from, what we used to be an open specification, and then trying to lock it down in as many ways as possible, at least development-wise, with, signing of executables, particularly on the M1, where you can't disable certain protection protocols, and so basically, I mean, they're taking something that is beautiful and they're ruining it. And one of the reasons, I mean, like I said, I love my Apple stuff, but I don't like their lock-in. And one of the things that GNUStep will never do is follow that lock-in. And I believe strongly that one of the things that GNUStep is doing is it's allowing people who have written their apps for either, for the Mac, to free themselves, to run on Windows, to run on Linux. The company that I mentioned earlier, Eggplant or Keysight, their main distribution channel right now is Windows. It's a Mac application with a Cocoa based code base running primarily for Windows users. Only a certain percentage of the people that they distribute to are Mac users and Linux users, but their Windows users far outstrip either one of those combined. So, I mean, it's just, GNUStep offers a way out of the lock-in, and that's one of the things that I've been trying to get across to people for a long time. I mean, one of the things I am working on, and I'm sure this should have been part of what your previous question was, is, some background. I'd helped a company named Algorithm, and Algorithm is a German company. What they do is they provide a application on Android that and on on the iPhone that is basically like a DJ sort of application where you have the little discs and stuff like that, and you can do repeating beats and various other things. It's a musical app. And what they did on Android is they took the GNUStep foundation layer, and their graphical layer is not that, apparently for them, not that complicated. So they implemented that using the I think Qt. I think they used Qt because they already had some of that work already done. But essentially, a large part of their application is GNUStep based. So it's allowed them to take their application and remove it partially, not remove it, but have it running on the Android platform, and all the foundational stuff, the the networking, the file management. I'm sure some of the maybe even some of the sound generation, but handling of events and stuff like that is done by GNUStep. One of the things that I am working on top of that, because that is sort of like that adds all of the people that work there added a lot of the stuff that is specific to the UI kit or the iOS version of Foundation. What I'm working on, and myself and others in the group are working on creating a UI kit implementation, so that you can deploy, so that people can do the same thing with iOS applications that they can now do with Cocoa applications, where they could just basically take their iOS application, build it, and deploy it on an Android phone. That with almost no effort. In fact, a company a while back was doing that with GNUStep before. They were called Portable, and the company that's using that framework that they developed is called Pocket Gems. And you may have heard of them. So I find that, and if you don't mind me saying it, I know you didn't ask this question, but I find that GNUStep is sort of a stealth project. A lot of people actually do use it, but they just don't know that they're using it, or a lot of companies have used it, but they don't say that they're using it. They just say, oh, well, we've ported our stuff to Android. And they don't say, hey, we used GNUStep to port our stuff to Android. They just port their stuff to Android magically, And I mean, so it's one of those things. We're kind of like a submarine project. I've always loved the movie Das Boot, and we're kind of like the submarine that is sort of like, we're underwater, we're hidden, but we're not gone, we're not dead, we're not anything like that. We're rising from the depths, if you know what I mean.
Well, and it's interesting because a similar project, though not quite the same, the Wine Project, yes, once it got Valve as a sponsor, I mean, they've always had crossover, but the combination of Valve and crossover has turned that project from something which almost worked a lot of the time into a viable solution that basically you can program Win32 on any environment.
My son used to run Final Fantasy 14 on his Mac. Now he built another PC to run on Windows, but Final Fantasy 15 is using Wine to run on Mac. I mean, sorry, the people Square Enix is using Wine to run on the Mac, and it's flawless.
Right.
It's absolutely flawless. It works. It works great. And also, did you know that the Wine project is related intimately with ReactOS?
Yes.
Which is another interesting project.
And some of the BSDs have done it to some extent, where they've taken GNUStep and tried to create their own OS X.
Yeah. I mean, one other thing we're working on is I had done a Kickstarter a while back for I called it the Cacao Linux project. And that is something that that is still sort of on the back burner, because one of the things that I would really love to do is, because everybody gets all of their packages from Debian or from whoever, and some of those packages are not quite up to date with where GNUStep currently is. Some of them are a few years old, some of them are last year. And believe me, I personally have added support for 15 or 20 classes since then. Because I tend to be a very quick developer. So I've added a lot of functionality since then. So they're a bit out of date. What I've always wanted to do is create a Linux or BSD reference implementation that has the latest of everything for that the project can do. Everything on master. In other words, everything is tested and we know that it works. And then make it look as beautiful as possible, to show people just how good GNUStep can look, and just how friendly it can be, because I also created an installation script that downloads all of the dependencies and everything for GNUStep and builds the project based on whatever operating system you're on. It even works on on Windows, as long as you have MSys2 installed. I'm going to, one of the things the reason why I haven't published it yet is because it doesn't work on certain operating systems. And the one thing that I know would happen is that people would look at this, this command line that I would put on the website would be very much like, brew or some other things where you can use curl to get the latest version of the script and then, build everything. I know that I would get a lot of, hey, it doesn't work on RISC OS or something like that, So I'm trying to make it work on as broad a set of systems as possible, so that people can download and build GNUStep, the latest of GNUStep on their platform, whatever that may be, as long as it's POSIX compliant and has maybe not even reasonably recent, as long as it is POSIX compliant and has a reasonable X server, it's very likely that GNUStep can build and you can build applications on it. So,
how's your Wayland support as well?
Oh, there are 2 developers working on Wayland support, and it is coming along. It's not complete yet, but it is definitely being worked on actively right now. GNUStep doesn't need a window manager, because an NS window knows how to draw itself. Because an NS window knows how to handle its events, it knows how to draw itself, including its decorations. So you don't need it. So with Wayland, we could run without X and be just fine. All we have to do is be able to render our graphics.
And I mean, I should add that I think that's another thing that's interesting to people, is that GNUStep can run on anything that runs Linux or Windows. So if you have any of those devices,
right,
you can develop like they develop on Mac OS X.
Yeah, because all of the tools, Project Builder and Gorm, and all of the other tools that are used, are buildable on any of those platforms. So they're just so for the future, there has been discussion about building an Xcode like application, because currently, Xcode is a combination of what used to be Project Builder and what used to be Interface Builder. But there are certain things that have been lost in Xcode along the way. So you can't, for instance, for Gorm, you can write palettes and create new classes and put them into palettes so that you can drag them into your application. You can't do that with Xcode anymore. But yeah, you can use all of the same development tools, and pretty much, that are available on GNUStep, which are very similar enough that anybody who is schooled in, how to write for a Mac can use it. So yeah, that was also one of the goals of the project. It was, I have to emphasize, and I probably should have emphasized this much earlier, GNUStep was not always meant, the prime goal of GNUStep is to be a framework for development. That is primary. Okay. Secondary is the compatibility, because what we wanted to do was, and that is by virtue of the fact that we have taken an existing spec, OpenStep up to Cocoa, whatever, and implemented it. And so the project really has 2 main goals, and that is number one, to deliver the functionality and ease of development that you have on the Mac to every platform imaginable, or every platform that will support it. and also to provide a way for Mac OS developers to move from a platform that is becoming more and more lock-in to other platforms that are open and more free than the Mac OS currently is. So yeah, yes, that was part of the point of the project, was to provide those tools. So you can develop tools on on GNUStep that don't exist on a Mac. And there are many, like there's a side project called the GNUStep application project. It's at gap.nongnu.org. And there are currently a number of games, including a port of the actual next version of chess from OpenStep. And it looks just like it, has all this, and oddly enough, it has some of the same bugs that the chess.app used to have. So yeah.
How many people are on the GNUStep team right now?
About 15. Myself and primarily myself, Fred Kiefer, who is a developer that supports the GUI library, Richard Frith McDonald, he works on the Foundation library, Ricardo Matola, who he supports the project builder and the G workspace, which is the Finder clone under GNUStep. And myself, obviously, I do GORM, and since I'm the lead maintainer, I pretty much dabble in pretty much everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah. But there's other people like the guys from Algorithm. All the developers who work at Eggplant are also members of the team. So there's 15 or 20 something right now. But I mean, the object right now is to grow that number as much as I can, because that's kind of my responsibility. So I mean, GNUStep is on GitHub. You can look at people can look at the code, and if they're interested, they can join if they really want. So it's like I think moving. I mean, if you don't mind me saying it, moving to GitHub was a really good move, because it exposed us to a lot of new eyes, if you know what I mean. Because we were on Savannah, it's run by an application called Savane, which is the same application same web application that people use on SourceForge, and it has a lot of shortcomings at this point. So when their side sort of server, which was called GNA, shut down, we took all of our code base and moved it over to GitHub. So yeah.
Now, if they do want to join, I assume they have to do the copyright assignment still.
I've been looking into relaxing that, because I find that it's a big barrier to entry. Sure. I mean, some people just don't want to do that. But if I may speak on that for a little bit.
Sure.
Right now, yes, we do require it. But my policy with respect to that is that if you have emailed me and said that you want to contribute, and then I will tell you, write a sign at GNU.org or go to the website and download the PDF. As long as I know that you've done that and that they've gotten you the disclaimer or the assignment, because you can do really either. You can say, I disclaim all of this code, so that basically when you disclaim the code, it enters the public domain, so anybody can do anything with it. Or you assign copyright. Then the reason why we do that is because, all right, there's so many aspects to this. Okay. We've got a huge, sword hanging over us in the form of Apple. That sword has somewhat been reduced by the recent, actually it's been completely eliminated by the recent ruling of the Supreme Court, for Google with respect to Java, because that court case was all about them implementing the Java spec, similar to what we're doing. Okay, we're implementing the OpenStep spec, which is an open specification, but so was Java. But of course, Oracle went after them. But what that case did is it established the case law that was necessary for us to say, hey, we're doing just the same thing that they're doing, and you ruled that as legal, so that's fine. But if you don't get like a copyright assignment or even a disclaimer from somebody, what you end up with is, instead of one unified copyright, where if we are attacked by someone legally with a unified copyright, that can be defended. You can take that to court as one entity and say, "Yay, we've got the copyright, so we have standing to defend it." But if you don't have, full control of that copyright, I'm not a lawyer, by the way, but sure. I've just assimilated this by osmosis from any number of sources, and that is that if you don't have that unified copyright, what you end up with is a mosaic of copyright holders. You end up with Joe, who has a copyright on, this class, and John, who has a copyright on that class, and and Helen, who has a copyright on another class. And instead of being able to bring one entity into court when you're defending yourself, you have to bring everybody. So, and that becomes untenable. It becomes harder to defend, and were we not implementing something that is, because if GNUStep becomes wildly popular, I'm quite sure what's going to happen is that Apple's going to go, oh, well, you're letting a lot of these people who write iPhone apps or iPad apps run their iPad apps on Linux or on Android or on whatever platform, and they're not going to like that too much. Right now, I mean, let's put it like this. I've heard from Apple employees saying that they love what we do. I'm sure they love what we do as long as we aren't harming them. You know what I'm saying? And the moment we become any sort of even a 0.1% threat, I'm sure that Apple is going to say something or do something. And it would be nice to be able to.
Do you think the key to that is iOS?
Yes, because I'm sure that as long as we were stay specific to Cocoa, we're fine. Because I don't think that, if you notice, you're able to now build apps, for the iPhone and then run them on the M1.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is coincidental, because you have frameworks when you build for iOS, on your Mac now, on your Intel Mac, because you have to have them to run under the simulator. Okay. So when you are, I think that the reason why you can run, apps from your iPhone or for your iPhone on the M1 is simply because those frameworks are already there. It's just a matter of actually being able to, to run and dynamically link with them. So I think that what Apple is moving towards, and this is just complete speculation, is that they are very much leaning towards making the UI kit and Foundation combination sort of the default or the easier way to go. Because, I mean, let's put it like this. I used to be a huge Commodore fan. I used to be a big Commodore fan, and they created a bunch of machines. One was the Plus4, and one was the C16, and the difference was that the C16 had less memory. The Plus4 had, I think, 256 kilobytes of memory, but everybody wrote for the C16 because it was the lowest common denominator. And because it was easier for developers, and this is the key, to reach the widest audience by developing for the C16, and that allowed them to also include Plus4 plus 4 people, And so I think that the same thing is going on with Apple right now, in the form of they're trying to make it so that you can develop applications using UIKit for your Mac, and that will become sort of the default way everybody writes their apps. Because what's the point then in writing an app in both Cocoa and in UIKit if, when you write it for UIKit, you can run it on both your iPhone, your iPad, and your Mac? So I am convinced that if the GNUStep project were to aggressively pursue compatibility with UIKit, there would be a problem.
Right.
In fact, the nib archive closed sort of stuff that I was talking about before appeared on iOS about 3 or 4 years ago. It only came to the Mac OS today. I mean, like with version 12 of Mac OS. So, yeah, I'm convinced that they would have a problem if somebody implemented a UIKit clone, and they knew about it, because the people at Portable and Pocket Gems, that was kind of under the radar, and that was only for games, So if somebody created a UIKit clone that was open source and free or free software, I think Apple would have a problem with it. Even just people looking at GNUStep and saying, "Hey, I want to port my application so that it can run on Windows," or I want to port my application so that it can run on Linux or BSD. Even that helps, because what happens is that when people are developing applications, they inevitably find, well, I mean, not saying that we're full of bugs, but inevitably you're very likely to find bugs or issues or missing functionality when you when you try to put an application on top of any framework, and GNUStep is no exception to that. So sure. It's not just people joining; it's people using it and porting their applications to it.
Well, Gregor, thank you very much for the conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
The GNUStep project can be found at www.gnustep.org. As always, thanks for listening.